The impact of Malcolm and Martin on the Selma movement led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act. By March 1966, nearly 11,000 blacks had registered to vote in Selma, where 12,000 whites were registered. More blacks were registered by November, when their goal was to replace County Sheriff Jim Clark. His opponent was Wilson Baker, for whom they had respect of many local residents and activists. With 11,000 blacks added to the voting polls in Selma by March 1966, they voted for Baker in 1966, turning Clark out of the office after 12 years of terror of his regime. Clark was later prosecuted and convicted of drug smuggling and served a prison sentence. In 1960, there were a total of over 53,000 black voters registered in the state of Alabama. 3 decades later, there were over 537,000, a tenfold increase. Selma, in accordance to my mother, after the civil rights movement and the black power movements in the 1970s all the way up until the early mid-90s, was a thriving black metropolitan area where blacks could engage in economic, social, and political endeavors. A. Peter Bailey, who was one of the top aides to Malcolm X and was the editor of Malcolm X's OAAU newsletter called The Blacklash, mentioned in his book Witnessing Brother Malcolm X, the Master Teacher, that he saw a New York Times article that highlighted a black American group called the Deacons of Defense and Justice, who were based out of Louisiana, and their mission was to protect black people who were demonstrating to protest white terrorism in the South. Right before Malcolm was to go out to give his speech on February 21st, 1965, Bailey showed Malcolm the article. After reading the article, Malcolm smiled and said, "This is a good move. It's just the kind of self-defense I've been advocating." And Bailey believed Malcolm would eventually reach out to them. Bailey also mentioned on the day Malcolm was assassinated that Malcolm told him and other top aides that he had accepted an invitation from SNCC to speak at a rally in Mississippi. He goes on to mention that Malcolm's going there was a major step in connecting the OAAU with some of the most committed and courageous young black activists in the most racist part of the country. If we rewind back to December of 1964, Malcolm met with Fannie Lou Hamer and the young courageous activists of Macomb, Mississippi. Here is Stokely Carmichael's account of the impact Malcolm had in his book called Ready for Revolution. The grassroots Africans had been very responsive to Malcolm's visit to Alabama. A month or so earlier, when Mrs. Hamer and a group of Delta teenagers had gone to Harlem, as we arranged for them to spend some time with the brother, he made a hell of an impression. The youth came back elated, just elated, talking about nothing but Malcolm. Even good Christian Mrs. Hamer had a crush. She mentioned Stokely, he's so handsome and he's so kind. Almost the same thing she would also say about Sekou Touré. Malcolm and Mrs. Hamer had spoken in a church where his introduction had been so clear and respectful and so loving of Mrs. Hamer. Malcolm confirms this near future trip to Mississippi in a February 18th radio interview with Stan Bernard when a hostile woman called and tried to rattle Malcolm.
Back to the phone. The WINS contact number, Judson 26405. This is contact, you're on the air.
Hello, Malcolm?
Yes?
The Ku Klux Klan should get you.
Thank you very much.
Let me point something out to this lady. I'm invited to Mississippi next week. I'll be going to Mississippi next week. The Ku Klux Klan will have all the opportunity it wants to get me. I was in Alabama last week. They had an opportunity then. You don't always have to go down south to find the Ku Klux Klan. Evidently one is your father, or you wouldn't be able to speak as you do.
Malcolm's domestic work is only one half of why his enemies wanted him to be eliminated. The other half is his international work. From several years of research on Malcolm's life and impact, his visit to the South for the first time in almost 5 years, and his work in Africa and the Middle East forced his enemies to stop his progress to the point where he couldn't make it out of the month of February 1965 alive. At the time of Malcolm's assassination, he was scheduled to meet with Dr. King, attend rallies in the South by establishing further ties with SNCC in Alabama and Mississippi's fight for freedom domestically, along with telling his top aides he was going to spend the next 6 months building up the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Internationally, Malcolm was to be a keynote speaker along with fellow revolutionary Che Guevara at the Bandung conference sponsored by revolutionary leader Ben Bella, then president of Algeria. Carl Evans, the author of the book The Judas Factor, The Plot to Kill Malcolm X, documents that Ahmed Ben Bella, the leader of the Algerian Revolution, had invited Malcolm X, along with Che Guevara and other leaders of the independence movements, to a special conference in Bandung, scheduled to begin on March 3, 1965. Malcolm X had also been able to get Ethiopia and Liberia to include human rights violations against African Americans with their petition on South African human rights violations before the International Court of Justice at Hague. The petition was scheduled to be heard on March the 12th, 1965. Malcolm also planned to stay in Africa for the OAU summit, then scheduled for March the 7th, 1965. The conference was supposed to have a resolution that would pass charging control and manipulation of the United Nations by United States imperialists. Jack Anderson stated in a broadcast in WINS radio on January 24th that the CIA had a keen interest to see Malcolm X neutralized before the end of February 1965. And I quote, "Malcolm X, black nationalist leader, has been secretly contacting African governments to strengthen ties between the African and American Negroes. He is also expected to be the top attraction at the coming Afro-Asian conference in Algiers, where he will likely join the propaganda attacks on his own country for its racial discrimination. He was also going to reveal the names he felt was a 5-man hit squad that would assassinate him. And on the day of his assassination, he planned to reveal his program of the Organization of African American Unity. If Malcolm X was able to live long enough to pull this off, would have been extremely damaging to America's foreign policy towards Africa and would greatly benefit the political positioning of Africans at home and abroad. For Malcolm to pull this off, his objective from the African allies he built prominent relationships with was to form a coalition with Dr. King and other mainstream civil rights leaders to speak out in a single voice on issues concerning Africa. In turn, the African delegates would pass the UN resolution supporting Malcolm's plan. The benefit of this? Such a strategy would give African states more leverage in dealing with the United States and would in turn give Afro-Americans more leverage in American society. So we can see it was very important to neutralize Malcolm before his program was even fully implemented.